My name's Clint O'Brien. I'm the Associate Director of Program and Innovation at CEDA, the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. Thanks for joining this afternoon for a discussion of the transformation of Australia's workforce, where we'll be discussing new trends in the national job markets and lessons from leading organisations, the commitments they've made to their people, the investments made to enable the workplaces of tomorrow, and how they're working to build culture digitally and transform Australia's workforce. CEDA acknowledges today and every day that we meet on Aboriginal land. Committed to recognition and reconciliation, we respect elders and support their stated aspirations. As we move forward towards the close of 2020, CEDA's 2021 program has continued to offer a diverse array of discussion forums, both face-to-face and virtual, to allow people from all corners of the country to participate and to inform and to promote ideas of critical issues. To keep abreast of the range of events and discussions on the most important issues impacting Australia's economic and social development, we encourage you to stay in touch with CEDA by visiting our website. We also produce regular podcasts, video interviews and blogs with leading experts and policymakers to ensure you can remain up to date with quality information on key issues impacting the economy more broadly. These are also available through CEDA's website. To kick us off today, we will have 5-minute presentations from our 3 keynote speakers. You can join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag workforce transformation and tagging CEDA by using the @CEDA_news tag. I'd now like to extend a very warm welcome to those joining us online and welcome those leading the important discussions today. Alexis George, the Deputy Chief Executive of ANZ, Steve Miller, the Chief Operating Officer at Microsoft Australia, and Dr. Ben Hammer, the Future of Work Lead from PwC Australia. I'll now invite Alexis to make her opening comments before we head to the gentlemen, and then into your Q&A discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Clint. Love the adaptability. That's what this new world is about, right? Yes, thank you. And I think if we all looked back at the last 12 months, I think it's challenged every belief that we have about work and about workplaces. And, I think it's also challenging how we communicate, how we make decisions, how we stay connected as a business. And just to give you a bit of perspective, at ANZ before March 18, and that's a date I'll never forget, we had over 2/3 of our workforce in over 33 countries working from the office 5 days a week. And over the space of those 2 weeks in March, we moved to nearly 40,000 people working at home. And, I don't know about you, but when we first kind of went through this, I thought we'd been at home for 6 weeks. And here we are now 12 months later, many of us still working at home. So I knew when we first did that it was a big change, but not for one moment did I understand how big a change it was, and particularly for our people. And we really had to go through many changes, making sure that we looked after the mental well-being of our people, and we put in place webinars with psychologists and psychiatrists, counselling service, and launched a digital app which is about mental and physical health. But as we know, we also had to train people in how to use things like this, Zoom, Teams, WebEx, My Meetings. I've used every kind of video conferencing over the last 12 months. We were laughing before, but I've seen every wrinkle on my face magnified 100 times as well. And I can tell you at ANZ, not everyone is a millennial, and it doesn't come natural to everyone to start to use some of these new technologies that have now just become a part of life. So we had to obviously introduce training and what is the etiquette for Zoom, and perhaps it's best to turn off your voice if you're going to go to the toilet or something like that. I'm sure we've all had many funny experiences over the last year. And for me, as I look forward to the workforce, I can honestly say that the last 12 months has really changed how I think about moving forward. And, I'm one of those people that did not have a home office, but I love being able to spend some time at home as well as in the office. So we really had to think about, what do we want the future to look like? What as an organisation works for us, but also for our people? And as you can imagine, people in our leadership team are probably from an older generation, and we really had to start with not having a fixed idea about what we wanted or thought, but come basically back to principles. And what do we need to succeed? And we came up with 6 principles that we really tried to remain open-minded about as we designed that future workplace, as we designed the skills that we need, the people that we need. And these were the beliefs that we came up with. Firstly, that direct connection to our purpose and culture does not change, whether we're physically meeting or virtually meeting, and making sure we continue to produce that was really important and continue to enforce that. Accepting that we do our most creative work when we collaborate in teams, and frequently that is in a physical environment. Thirdly, that work is valuable. It is really valuable to many of us, and we get a lot of self-esteem from it. That we respect and care for each other and want each other to develop and grow, and that our specific workplaces are important. And finally, we have to be agile and adaptable as we move into this world that we look forward to now. And so, we really wanted to start to prepare our people for this flexibility and to accept that, over the last 12 months, we've really realised there are benefits for us and there are benefits from our people in being able to work some of those days at home and some of those days in the office. And so we've really decided as we look forward that we'll have a blended way of working, 2 to 3 days in the office every week and 2 to 3 days at home. And that is really important for us to continue with the culture that we think we need to survive and thrive in this new world. And I think as I think about the ramifications of that, of course, I think the workplace is going to look like a different place. Maybe it won't be rows of desks and chairs. We've pretty much all moved to open plan, but we're now thinking about how do we have more collaboration spaces as the workplace becomes much more about that. I've heard lots of debate about whether there'll be full remote working or not. And I'm not closed-minded to that. We will test in some areas having more full-time remote working. But for us, we always have to come back to those 6 principles. And if we think about moving away from the workplace and the skills that we're going to need in this future environment, we all hear data, digital, AI, machine learning, and I'm sure we've read something about that. But I think, and I was listening to the CEO of Woolworths yesterday when he said, really, we've moved 5 years in one. And you can see the reality of that. And our customers are changing, which means we have to change. The skills we need in the future are going to have to change. And just to give you a perspective about how our customers have changed in banking just in the last 12 months. If I look at the long-term trend around cash, we'd seen over-the-counter transaction in our branches decrease by 50%. Probably not surprising, you hear about it all the time. But in the last 12 months, 22% reduction. So you can see there is a real change in customer behaviour. Similarly, ATMs down 10%. And the digital connectivity went up to less than 5% to over 25% in simply 12 months. So our customers are fundamentally changing the way that they interact with us. And as a result of that, the skills we need to be able to serve those customers continue to change as well. They're comfortable talking to us through Zoom now. They're comfortable dealing with us through an app. So what do we need? Right, that's our changing customers. We need our people to change as well. Yes, curiosity, hard work, passion for the customer. There'll always be things we want in our organisation. There'll always be things we need. But, as we think about the future, we know people are going to need new skills. And so we introduced a self-development learning tool, all digital, where people can basically go and learn, do courses. Python programming is something I had a bit of a stab at to test it out myself, because we know these are things they're going to need in the future. And, as I look at our bank, who would have ever thought that we'd want to become a centre of excellence for engineering? But that's where we are now. We don't have product managers anymore. We have journey experts. We have design thinkers. Will there be a role for good bankers? Absolutely. But I think we have to open our minds and open our hearts to these new skills, enable us to succeed in the future. So if I look back over the last 12 months, for me, I think it's been a revelation. I think there are permanent changes in the way we work. There are permanent changes in where we work, and there are permanent changes in the way we dress for work. And I think in the majority of cases, they're good. They're going to give people options. But, for leadership, I think that increases the challenge. Before, we had to think about productivity, efficiency, customer preferences. Now we've got to think about the mental and physical well-being of our people as well in order to deliver those. But as I look forward, I think it's fantastic. Do I know what it's absolutely going to look like? I do not. But I think there's some really exciting opportunities for us to embrace in the future. And I, for one, am looking forward to it.
Alexis, thanks very much for that. We'll now invite Steve to make his comments. And just a reminder to audience members that if you slide down on your viewing screen, you will find there an opportunity to submit your questions through to Pigeonhole, which other attendees can then also vote on, and we will put them to the panel shortly. The adaptability Alexis alluded to in her opening sentences was because, as you will have noticed, our moderator for today was having a connection issue. And so we'll struggle through, we'll get through and make sure we get to all of your questions and have the opportunity to hear the comments from all of our speakers. Steve, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Clint, and thank you, CEDA, for having me and Microsoft as part of this discussion. And thank you for your opening comments, Alexis. Really interesting to see how ANZ has grappled with the many dimensions of the pandemic and what is still to come. For us, this has been a really interesting experiment in the real life practicalities of what technology brings when remote working is no longer a nice to have, but is a needs to have. Even before the pandemic, many significant changes were transforming the nature of work. Our processes were becoming more flexible, organic, responsive, and adaptive. The pace of work was speeding up already. The amount of information at our fingertips was dramatically increasing. And so we were seeing changes in where we worked, moving away from fixed workplaces. And work was becoming more collaborative, more networked, dynamic, and, to Alexis's comments earlier, more multidisciplinary than ever. And the skills that were needed for that way of working and for the emergence of tech, not as an enabler of business, but as a way that we do business, were creeping up. The pandemic has accelerated that dramatically. And I agree completely with the comments of the Woolworths CEO. 5 years of digital transformation accelerated into 12 months. So fast forward just a few months, it's quite incredible to think that this time last year we were just at the beginning of the lockdown phase here in Australia. But if we fast forward just that few months, we're now seeing that the enforcement of working from home has tested our agility and our responsiveness to the limits. It's forced us to adapt, to change more rapidly than we probably ever thought possible. And it's also shone a light on where the existing technologies, the existing workplace environment that we had has been lacking. And it's also helped us really think about the work processes that we have and how they needed to be reinvented. And as the pandemic has evolved, many of us have found that what we've been able to be productive as we were before, in many cases, we're even more productive than we were before. But that picture is very, very mixed across the world and for the different types of work that each of us participates in. And we've discovered that for the knowledge worker, who may have the even most up-to-date technology, and we at Microsoft think that a lot of our employees have the most up-to-date technology, some kinds of work are more difficult to achieve in an all-remote world. Added to this, for many, the pressures of combining work and home life, well, they're proving to have profound effects on our health and well-being. So what have we learned? Well, a couple of key insights. As the pandemic was starting, we built effectively across all the Microsoft research organizations that span the globe, a really focused research team of anthropologists, social scientists, software engineers to really look at what is the real world example of a world that many in the tech industry have been talking about for quite some time. The first one, and for those of you that have kids, this will not be a surprise, digital fatigue is real and human connection is essential. Just as we see with kids who spend way too much time in front of the screen, the same is true of workers. And this comes really to the fore when we think about a couple of key dimensions. First, social capital. I think when you think about the feeling of social isolation that people get from working remotely, whilst we see each other through screens, internal surveys from Microsoft and from many of the companies that we're working with to survey this report employees are really feeling a need for the informal contact and the spontaneous interaction that you get from a working environment, from a collective environment where people are moving about a building. And that is really quite difficult to meet in a strictly work from home environment. 60% of employees in that survey group that we're talking about have reported feeling less connected than before COVID-19 struck. And it's interesting how we adapt to this, because some companies that we've partnered with, including ourselves, are looking at innovative ways to address how you build that social cohesion, that sense of social capital. Bots for water cooler apps that connect employees from across the globe and just drive them in every single day. 15 minutes, I'm off talking to someone in Brazil. And they run within the Teams environment because that is where people in the Microsoft landscape are spending a lot of their time. For me, some of those quick ones are doing daily check-ins with my leadership team, Friday afternoon wine sessions where you get to see people in their own natural environment. And for us, we really encourage, even though I've got a background on right now, we really encourage no backgrounds. Bring life into the workplace so that we can see kids, we can see houses. And it's a really nice way of giving people more freedom to build the lives in the way that they want. We also know that some of the world's most creative ideas come from just chewing the fat. But the move to remote work has eroded some of that creative capital. You feel the need to have a meeting, to schedule creative time. You miss the complete fluidity of just sitting on a whiteboard and coming up with ideas. And so when you think about that lack of collective space to throw out ideas, innovation as a team is super difficult to achieve remotely. And that makes it hard to do the idea generation. It makes it hard to do the planning and really work in that creative space. Again, technology is looking at how do we solve some of these gaps. The whiteboard, for me, a really key part of just completing an idea and getting thoughts down. That's getting a work from home makeover. Researchers work on, virtual versions. Together mode in Teams, for those of you who have had the chance to use Teams, that came from the feedback that said looking at a single screen, even though there might be 12, 18, 24 people on it, well, that doesn't make me feel like I'm collaborating. And so Together mode was a feature in Teams that was developed to solve part of that problem. Because we know that collaboration is not just about transactional conversations, it's about engagement, about connections, about the feeling of belonging and feeling that your ideas can be heard, not as you wait for someone to come off mute, but in the really fluid, natural way that people tend to like to interact. As we said, the normal workday was already disappearing. The pandemic, unfortunately, has definitely accelerated that. In one of our studies that we've done, the work weeks of 70% of our employees had lengthened by at least 3 hours. In external surveys with some of our customers, the vast majority saw work extending into the weekend. And in some cases, in some of those companies, weekend work had tripled. And it was making it really difficult to use an end of day feature or an end of day thinking and feeling between the splits of the physical environment and then the move to home. One of our survey pieces said that in Microsoft Teams, between 5 p.m. and midnight, the amount of messaging, traffic, and activity had increased by 69%. Huge increase. Now, for us, it's really about how we think about elevating that conversation, making sure that people are aware of the impact on your productivity. Our workplace analytics tools is a way that we are really surfacing that in a much bigger way, suggesting micro breaks, focus time, building in commute time to our team where their time in the morning is blocked in the same way that they would have commuted by car or by public transport. That's now fixed into Teams to block other people from using that time. Again, it's a downside that the pandemic created, but it's a positive of where technology can really help bridge that benefit gap. But some of the benefits are also real. That commute is something that people really found frustrating. It's something that people really found was using their time in a non-productive way. And so really thinking about how you can build that commute time helps people continue to get some of the benefits that they would have got from their physical world by using technology in smarter ways. And another key benefit for us is really this thinking about what is remote first thinking. Like many companies, we can be very headquarter centric, whether in Australia, that's a lot of our employees in Sydney, or whether that's globally, having a lot of our employees in Redmond in Washington State. But the question is, work from the suburbs when you can be really literally anywhere. And so the shift to working from home is allowing more workers to live wherever they want. And for Australia, I think that really represents an incredible opportunity that we are now seeing playing out in the shift to our regions. When everyone's working remotely, the colleague across the world, well, they're just as easy to contact via email, video conference as your office mate. But it's also had a really interesting effect on inclusion. Before, we had a lot of people who would work remotely from the office. And when they were doing meetings that involved people who were in a physical premise, well, they found that environment quite exclusive. They didn't feel like they could be part of the conversation. One of the benefits that we have seen is that when everyone's remote, well, everyone's in the same scenario and everyone's idea can be on a level playing field. In one of that same study that we've been doing as part of this unfortunate global experiment, 52% of traditional remote workers felt now more included now that everyone was in the same virtual room. The trick is, as we move to a more of a hybrid environment, is how we maintain that. How do we keep some of our remote processes active so that workers who do stay permanently remote are able to contribute in exactly the same way as those who are participating in the physical room? So for Microsoft, when we think about these radical changes that the pandemic has enforced upon us, they provide a unique opportunity to reflect and think deeply about the future of work that we want. They give us an opportunity to really think about the kind of life that we aspire to as individuals, as organizations and society, and the role that technology from companies like us and from Zoom, who we're using today, are producing to help us deliver that better society. It leads us to deeply focus on how we want to invent that more fulfilling future, one that considers the broader scope of our lives, not just the hours we spend working. For us, and in response to all of our customers, this involves developing technologies that ensure we support what people do best: being social, being creative, using our insight, our ingenuity, the judgment, the intelligence that we have innately to connect as humans. We're freer to do this if the systems we build play to the strength of the digital technologies that we have, connecting us across space and time, taking care of the routine actions in intelligent ways, getting the vast quantities of information and getting the data sets that we need to use, using artificial intelligence to create better ways where we can apply those innately human strengths. And by getting those human-machine partnerships right, we believe the pandemic can spur us on to get a much more human-centric future of work, one that puts the individual, the team, the collective at the center of how we experience it, and make sure that companies can thrive on the innate talents of their people, and technology plays a role in supporting those people to do their best work. A big future ahead, but one that we are looking forward to embracing and supporting each of you as we stride toward it.
Steve, thanks very much. Can I just call out the unfortunate global experiment, as you called it? I think that was completely eloquent and very lovely put with a charming accent to boot. Let's move right along now to Dr. Ben Harben. Ben is the Future of Work lead at PwC and is going to share with us now everything he knows about the future of work. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Clint. And I think everything I know in all of 5-ish minutes. So I'll give it my very best shot. From listening to Steve and Lex, they spoke to some of the shifts that we're seeing around workforce transformation and some of their organisational experiences. I guess my role is a little bit more industry agnostic and working with lots of different organisations across different sectors. So I'll talk to some of the higher level trends that I'm seeing at large, and then hopefully that sets the scene to get stuck into Q&A. So as a starting point for me, if we go back to before COVID hit, change was already happening to us at the fastest rate in human history, but at the same time, we were experiencing it at the slowest that it will be for the rest of our lives. So while we thought it would be all about the robots coming to take our jobs, it was this microscopic invader in the coronavirus that really shook things up. And as Lex and Steve said, you have the likes of the Woolly CEO saying they've experienced 5 years of change in 1 year. I would say some organisations did 5 years in 6 months. And what it really showed us is that organisations needed to adapt whether they liked it or not. And that's a pretty interesting retrospective to me, because I feel like if you asked leaders 18 months ago to move to an entirely virtual operation for a period of time to the extent that was possible for the work that they did, they would have said that it couldn't be done. But what we've learned from this work from home experiment is that it wasn't that it couldn't be done, it's that it wouldn't be done. And so now we're in 2021, the dust is sort of starting to settle with a little bit more clarity around what the future of work would look like, although, as Lex said, still far more questions than answers. Things like flexible ways of working aren't new. We were already working from home. Stuff was already being automated. New workforce and workplace models were already emerging. But while many of these challenges existed, they're now a lot more pronounced and complex. And there are a few key trends that have been highlighted within all of this that I think have really been elevated in their importance and urgency. So I'll quickly touch on these. The first is around workplaces and spaces, then skills, well-being, which both Steve and Lex have touched on, and then, of course, digital transformation. So when we think about workplaces and spaces, and I intentionally use that in the plural because it's more than just the office, we think about it a lot around working from home. And one thing that I found quite interesting was a study that Atlassian put out last year during the pandemic, and they found that 43% of knowledge workers had actually never or very rarely worked from home. So what this goes to show is that whilst all of these policies existed, it wasn't necessarily as much of a thing that we thought it was for a range of reasons, and which also talks to the need for the mindset and behavioural shift which comes with adopting these new ways of working. And moving forwards, we know that it's going to shift. We've had Lex say that ANZ's looking at 2 to 3 days in the office / at home per week. CBRE research that they put out recently said that 85% of people that they'd surveyed want to work from home a minimum 2 to 3 days a week as well. So it's about home, it's about the office, it's about the third space, it's about choosing the environment for your day. And our research shows us that people want to go into the office for collaboration and people connection, and at home for deep thinking and for administrative tasks. It's seeing this lessened need for face-to-face, positioning organisations to rethink where they source their talent from. So we're actually talking to some clients who are thinking not about how do I engage across Australia, across multiple time zones, but how do I engage internationally across the same time zone as a different way of thinking about where work gets done and the notion of place. And as part of this, we're also seeing what was announced last week, which was the largest quarterly internal migration hit on record, with more people moving from cities to regions because of this lessened need for face-to-face. And within all of this, I think just the important caveat is that while there's a lot of work from home chat in the future workplace discussion, it's important to note that the majority of Australians aren't actually in a position where they can just work from home based on the work that they do. And so what we're seeing in some organisations is this cultural tension playing out between those who have to go and work because they're on the front line or they're in a service economy like retail where they need to be physically in a store or a shop front, and then those in their organisation who have the perceived luxury of being able to work from home as well. The second one I mentioned was well-being, and something that Steve said is so true in this context, which is that the lines between home and work are so increasingly blurred now. And originally what we saw was that productivity actually went up when we started working from home at the height of when the whole shift happened. But now what we're doing is we're just working longer and not necessarily seeing the productivity benefit from it. So there's a real risk of burnout that's on the horizon for a lot of organisations. We're also seeing increased instances of isolation and loneliness, try and say those words together. And leaders are unsure of what their roles are and, to put it quite bluntly, their obligations when it comes to employee wellbeing. So that's something that's a nut we're still trying to crack, but something we know organisations need to step up in. The next one's then skills. And I couch this in the context of we've seen the lowest intake of migrants since World War II in Australia, which is resulting in some critical shortages in key roles and sectors that have previously relied on skilled migration. And so to help this, the government's introduced a whole lot of policies and programs around reskilling and upskilling to support the development of local talent, particularly for those who are most disproportionately impacted and displaced as a result of the pandemic, so particularly women and younger Australians. And when it comes to job creation, we can expect to see a lot of this targeted in industries like construction and manufacturing based on where the government's been spending. But there's also a broader opportunity here, and it's one we've been talking about for some time, but one where we just need to actually do something about it. And that's government, industry and education coming together collectively to talk about and actually action how we go about closing the skills gap in Australia. Because recent modelling that we launched, I think last month maybe, was that by doing so, we can uplift Australia's GDP by 5.2% and create 200,000 net new jobs by 2030. Then moving to the last one, which is around digital disruption. And this was a massive and the key driver around workplace and workforce transformation pre-COVID. And again, it's only picked up speed. We actually surveyed globally CFOs during the pandemic, and 50% of them told us that they expect to accelerate their transformation agenda as a result of COVID, which is in line with what we see in recessions where we invest in automation. And moving forwards, we can expect to see a lot of this in the prop tech or property technology space as well as things like sustained use of video conferencing and collaboration platforms. But what all of this tells us, and similar to what Lex said about what they've seen at ANZ, is that requires a significant investment in uplifting the foundational digital literacy and building the digital skills of your workforce. And then going to Steve's point, when we invest in all things digital, we need to equally invest, if not invest more, in what makes us uniquely human. So those uniquely human skills, or what some people call soft skills, but let's try and come up with a better term for it. So in addressing some of these challenges, I think organisations really need to align their leadership teams to ensure that there's this cross-functional view around the future of work transformation and engage and listen to the voice of their employees and their people as they co-design this future. Because while top-down leadership is effective and works in times of crisis, it just won't cut it when it comes to the redefined world of work.
Ben, thanks very much for that. We are now open for questions. We have had plenty submitted, and please do continue to submit and vote on your questions. I am going to throw first to Ben, perhaps with this one, given you'd sort of touched on some related content, Ben, but then certainly all speakers feel welcome to join in. How do you think we should be approaching skilled migration when international borders open up again? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think, look, it's twofold. What we're seeing at the moment is an investment in going about building local talent and looking at how we can try and leverage the skills system to make sure that we're mitigating ourselves against potential skills gaps that could have a longer term economic impact. What we really want to do is understand what are some of the key growth industries within Australia, what are some of the industries and sectors in which the government is investing in, and where do we think there is that critical gap. What we've seen historically and what I think we'll expect to see moving forwards is the advanced industries, so advanced manufacturing, food tech, ag tech. That's where we tend to look overseas for some of those advanced technologies and bringing that capability into the country. I think it's thinking about how do we tap into those, and particularly when you think about what Australia invests in artificial intelligence, it's around $60 million compared to other economies where it's in the billions. We're likely to see, economies like China, the US and Germany really invest in building some of those capabilities and skills. And so I think understanding what's happening globally in that context, where we see the funding directed here, and particularly tapping into those advanced industries.
Fantastic.
Look, I think that's totally true, and we have to recognise the benefits we have here in Australia. Like we've got CSL, which has just turned into an amazing global company. We're fantastic in the agri space, but I just don't think we perhaps put enough credence or value in those kind of skills, and I agree with you, Ben.
Yeah, and I'd echo that as well. I think that one of the things that we talk a lot about from Microsoft perspective is that we do need to stimulate with good government policy, but also the role of the foundational companies in Australia and the tech giants like ourselves, Google, etc., a really burgeoning science and technology community within Australia to infiltrate all of those industries and environments. And I think it's going to be something that is essential for us to get right over the next decade. To Ben's point, this is the emerging way that countries are going to differentiate their workforce. And I think Australia's got a huge role to play in this. It's not only in the financial services and the agri-tech space that we're particularly strong, but even in discrete manufacturing. The CSL example is a great example of where IP is the business model, not manufacturing in itself. And what we would love to see, and companies like ourselves want to promote as well, is that we are taking a much more forward view of the skills required to do that and the transformation of our industries to make us successful over the next decade and beyond.
Steve, that's a good point about Australia differentiating its workforce. And I'm curious to hear from the other speakers and perhaps also yourself on how organisations are differentiating themselves. Is there an opportunity in this for organisations to really demonstrate some competitive advantage when we talk about the offer to employees? We see younger staff preferring to work from home arrangements as opposed to some senior staff. What does it do for the marketplace with regards to talent?
I'll give my perspective, and Ben and Alexis, you can jump in. For us, this is actually one of the major advantages, competitive differentiation advantages that Microsoft has always propagated. It's the sense that actually work is a thing that you do, not a place that you go, and that your innate talent can take you wherever you want. So for me, the changing dimension of that is that the traditional geographical focus that talent has taken to either move to the UK or the US is really broken down through COVID. We are hearing a lot from our younger prospective employees that not really that keen to move to the US or the UK, and really, why should I? And I think that's the additional opportunity for Australia, is if we really break down our notion of what that geographical boundary means, then talent and ingenuity, and therefore business, can reside anywhere and be successful globally. And I think there's a mindset challenge to that, but also I think there's a role for leadership to really start enforcing that opportunity.
And if I can just add to that, I mean, I think if I look at our own organisation, flexibility had been one of the pylons of everything we do. But I gave you the stats before. We talked about flexibility. I am disgusted at myself that I actually didn't role model that. Like, I did not have a desk at home. I did not have a monitor at home until the last 12 months. So I think it is incredibly important that we adapt to this new world in order to build that employee value proposition. And that does mean being real about flexibility, being real about where you can and cannot do work, being real about the hours that you want to work. But I love the point Stephen made. You know, we're a global company, not like Microsoft, but we're in 33 countries. As Australians or New Zealanders, which is our home base, we've always had this bias that we are smarter than people in other countries. And I think one of the things as we move forward that we're working on now is, to your point, an equalisation and an embracing of the talent in other countries. Particularly, we have quite large presences. And I think that adds back to the employee value proposition here and seeing the global nature and skills. So you talk about employee value propositions. I think those companies who still continue to operate in a traditional mindset will really be left behind as we move forward. And I think it's imperative that you embrace this. Every survey we've all seen says people want more flexibility. And we all know it's a fight for talent. Ben just talked about how hard a fight for talent it will be in Australia. It's a fight for talent, so we have to have compelling employee propositions.
And I think just really echoing and reinforcing what Lex said there around organisations need to use this as the opportunity to reset their mindset and their behaviours. And it's a platform for how they can move forwards and transform their organisations. organisations need to let go of what was in the past, because quite frankly, it's not about going back. Work was broken, and this idea that it was this, fantastic way of doing things and I just want COVID to finish so we can go back, that's not going to cut it. What organisations need to do is rethink what this means for their employee value proposition moving forward, because if they don't, other organisations are, and people have shown us in the last 6 months that they will walk and they will go to an organisation that does offer that. The other thing is that if by 2030 we can expect to see that 50% of the Australian labour market are millennials, and millennials are digital natives and they want digitally first organisations need to offer it, and this is the real stimulus to build that momentum and do it.
Thanks very much for that. We have a really interesting question here from Ming Long. Now, Ming's a member of CEDA's national board, and that's not why I'm focusing on it, but it's a brilliant question. So let me put this to you. As we move to continue hybrid working, what biases do we need to avoid and unlearn to ensure that promotions just don't go to people who we're seeing every day and working in the office?
That's a great question.
I told you.
Maybe, Lex, I'll start with this one because we have some data points that might be useful and bring a bit more colour, and then pass it on to you guys. When we asked our people at PwC last year some of these types of questions, we heard that around 1/3 of our workforce were really concerned about career progression because of this idea of, if you can't see me, how do you know that I'm adding value? And when we engaged a behavioural scientist to help us understand this a little bit more, what we also saw was playing out was because people never had these non-verbal cues to know that I'm giving a good presentation now and you're happy with what I'm saying and I'm doing a good job. I just work harder and harder and harder and longer to try and compensate, just to make sure I'm really confident that I'm doing well. And so it's playing out in that regard. You've also then got the Atlassian study that I mentioned, which showed that a significantly higher number of women than men want to work from home as a more permanent option. And what we can see is this unconscious bias and discrimination play out, which favours not gender, but which favours people who come into the office. It just so happens that if they're more males than females, that females could be disproportionately affected as a result of it. On the flip side to that, though, I also think that there's a real opportunity here, because what we've seen is that women, the same Atlassian study, 46% of women said that they feel that they are more confident in their ability to perform in a remote environment because it takes away this element of presenteeism. So to me, that's a real opportunity to see more females in leadership roles, working remotely where you are able to raise your hand in some chat functions, where you can write in the chat function. It enables more introverted people to step up, perform, and have an opportunity to stand out. And it also enables some of those younger people to come through the leadership ranks quicker because they're able to leverage the technology available to them to their advantage and to perform. So I think that there's a real unconscious bias that could play out, but there's also a really significant opportunity as well.
I think I love your comments, Ben, and that. I think we're all really, really conscious of this. It's a lot harder to make sure you put in the processes and systems to make sure that we don't have different unconscious biases creep into this situation. And you just mentioned it. Yeah, we're going to have more millennials in the workforce, but a lot of people aren't very competent at using Zoom or Teams either. And I'm constantly going, go to the 3 buttons, go down here, push that. I'm not a millennial, clearly, but I'd like to think I'm an assimilated immigrant. So I think as we move forward, it is really important for the more senior people to firstly role model this. It's not good enough to say, yes, flexibility is important, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter if you're at home 3 days a week. And I think that is a real commitment from senior executives to do that and to be at home and to be seen to be at home, like I think you said, Steve, with the dogs or whatever running around. So I think role modelling is really, really important. And I've had this debate internally so many times as people start to say, oh, we're not going to know who's good as we look at people virtually as opposed to physically. And, I'm a bit more optimistic in that, because as a senior exec, there's a lot of people who also tell you how wonderful they are, and you judge them on ways other than their output. And I think this may be the great equaliser, and so that, we may see some changes and some differences in the way people are promoted. It's going to be hard, though. Let's be honest. We all have unconscious biases. You can't help it. And so I think making sure the process is in place, the systems are in place to try and manage or eradicate that are really important. And certainly we don't have all the answers to that yet. We were just grappling with diversity. Now we've got to grapple with the virtual environment as well.
No, I would agree with all of that. I think that I'm fairly optimistic. I've become a bit of a broken record inside Microsoft talking about interviewing people for their capabilities, their competencies, the way that they think rather than their experiences and what they have necessarily talked to you about. And I think there is an opportunity when you don't have proximity as physically as we've been experiencing for us to do that, but it is hard. It is a difficult challenge, and leaders have got to role model that, but also our systems have got to really focus on understanding people's capabilities, understanding their thinking style, because it's that agility that will help them be successful beyond the immediate role and help the company prosper as well.
I'm going to head straight now to the most voted on question. It may be a swift answer, it may be a long one. The question comes from Anonymous, who loves to ask questions of CEDA.
Yeah, they're very good.
And the question is, what is the app that your organisations are using to monitor mental and physical well-being? If there is one, what are you using, or how are you measuring that?
We actually use something, but I'm not sure it's about monitoring. It's about helping people with their physical, mental well-being. We call it Healthy Me for ANZ, but actually we partner with a company called Gordian, who we've been using before, and we use some of their content and some of our content. But it's actually really highly utilised. And it's quite interesting watching the stats about people when people are going in there, and it's typically when in one of the countries we have been through a lockdown or there is an escalation. So it's been really interesting for me. It's something our people are really using. I think, things like mindfulness and meditation, which is something I've always been interested in, they're actually engaging with now. And so, I think it's a good solution. It's not for everyone, but it's for some of our people to help, deal with that digital fatigue, Zoom fatigue, which we all know exists.
I'll give a quick answer because it won't be shocking what I answer. We use there's a part of Microsoft 365 which is called My Analytics, and in My Analytics, it basically gives you prompters. It basically tells you if you are it tells you who you're collaborating with, if you're not taking enough breaks, if you're online too often, if you're burning the midnight oil, if you're not taking regular exercise breaks, and there's a whole heap of stuff that actually, to be honest, on a Monday morning when it lands in my inbox, I go, ooh, I'm not doing very well at this. But it's a really good prompter, to Alexis' point, to be mindful, right? Just to surface awareness to the individual, I think helps get them control. And I think technology is got a role to play that. But there's some amazing apps out there that really focus on your exercise, your mindfulness and meditation space that connect up. And I would encourage everyone to do that, because the more information we have, the digital fatigue is real, right? Spending all day on a Teams or a Zoom meeting is not a great way to spend your day. So,
yeah, I think very quickly from a PwC angle, there's this real acknowledgement that well-being is quite unique and individual. So we have this platform called Be Well internally. There's a range of different providers that have different purposes that people can tap into. There's also having obviously the EAP provider, which a lot of organisations have, investing in leadership training so that leaders understand how they can play a role in supporting the well-being of their teams. And then a couple of different apps around mindfulness, as well as the physical health component that Steve spoke about as well.
Fantastic.
Can I just say something, Clint? So Ben raised a really important point, and I think Steve mentioned before. We talk about the well-being, etc. The role of leaders has fundamentally changed through this last 12 months as we work in this digital world. And I've got to mention it before. We've got 10,000 managers who have to manage people in this organisation. They used to manage KPIs like productivity, customer satisfaction, quality of work. Now they're in a digital environment having to worry about their people, and are their people happy and safe and engaged? And it's completely different a completely different challenge for them. And I think, we quickly had to put in some leading through change for people to make sure our leaders looked after themselves before they start worrying about everyone else. So it's a really different future for leadership.
That's really interesting. And I think perhaps almost on the flip side of that and not unrelated, I'd like to ask all of you actually, what your best tips are for injecting fun into the workplace. How are you doing that both in the office and with teams who are dispersed and working remotely? How are you building that corporate culture digitally?
Well, I show pictures of my dog all the time, who my children say I love more than them. So he's been on camera multiple times. I do think it is about exposing a bit of yourself, to be honest, when it's because you sit and look at yourself all day. And I think it is just about having a bit of a laugh when it's stressful. But and coming back to always why we come to work, we don't come to work to process 5,000 pieces of paper. We come to work because we believe in what we're doing, we're helping customers, and we love the social interaction. I think Steve mentioned we've done painting on Zoom, we've had drinks on Zoom, we've played trivia on Zoom. I mean, it's all those things, and it takes a bit more effort, honestly, but it's so important.
I 100% agree. I think that the biggest role, and I think a lot of what our people are looking for is they're leaders to be human. They're leaders to show the vulnerability of who they are. And for me, look, a day without a laugh is not a good day. And so let's make sure we don't take ourselves too seriously. There's always a good one for me is the filters on your face. I may have spent a Teams meeting like a potato. And I think that's...
Not a cat?
I've been a cat as well, actually. But that's fun, right? And I think people just people connect with people. Humans connect with humans. And making sure that we show that, whether it's digital or physical, I think is a fundamental part of leadership and even more important in the future.
Yeah, look, I'm all about cracking lame and potentially inappropriate jokes. So my team will definitely tell you that. One time I actually rocked up to a conference call and my virtual background was the Four Seasons landscaping. So that got a good reaction. But for me, I think it comes back to the role of leaders around creating an environment of psychological safety, which enables authenticity and vulnerability. And when we do that, that enables people to have fun. So I think the way it can be sort of less structured fun and more so creating that psychological safety that facilitates that level of enjoyment and whatnot, I think is really important. The other thing to flag is throughout the pandemic, when we surveyed our people, we actually heard that more than half of people said that they thought culture had improved since working from home in the pandemic, which was a really interesting one for us because we thought that maybe it would have got worse. And so when we unpacked that, what we found was that our employees and organisations at large, employees facilitate their social contract with the workplace around efficiency, productivity, KPIs, and the social contract with home is all about fun, relaxation, belonging, etc. And so when people were working more from home, they were actually feeling more of those sorts of sentiments. So now when we're talking to clients about how do they try and create this environment in terms of returning to the formal workplace and enticing people to come back to the office, we're saying how can you recreate some of that social contract that people have been experiencing in their home environment into the workplace as well.
That's great. I've taken away that if Steve can be a cat, and the chief operating officer of Microsoft can be a cat, then I think anybody can. That's my favourite takeaway from today. I'm mindful that we are running out of time, so I will go to the next most voted on question and put it all to you. It goes in part to a conversation we were having before we went live, and we have addressed in some context, but let me put it to each of you. To what degree will the shift to working from home be permanent? How are your organisations approaching the balance of work from home versus work from the office? Who'd like to go first?
I'll go first.
Go, Lex.
Look, I think we've already talked about it largely, and when we talked about the employee value proposition. I personally think this is a permanent change in the workforce. I know others, and then the way we work, I know others have a different view. I think Ben made a really important point, though, that a lot of people can't work from home. They can't work in a blended way. They can't work partly in the office. They're lucky I work in a bank where they can. So our proposition to employees going forward is you'll work in the office 2 to 3 days a week and you work at home 2 to 3 days a week. And when you're office, it's about the teaming, it's about collaboration, it's about interaction with your workmates. Of course, if there's reasons you want to be in the office 5 days a week, and not everyone has a safe environment at home for many reasons, come to the office. We want it to be a safe place for you and somewhere where you can enjoy going. But we will absolutely be giving people the option to work in that hybrid environment. As we start to talk, do we have 100% remote? We're still grappling with that because I think the workplace has a really important place around culture, around collaboration, about creative thinking. And yes, I think we will run some pilots about full remote working and how we keep all of those things going without the physical interaction. All that's really easy, right? And it's a question somewhere else. But it changes the whole way we have to manage. The workplace is now at home as well. So what does that mean? You have to make sure that workplace is safe, that people are sitting appropriately, have the appropriate monitors, physically okay. It is really big change for organisations to think about all of these things, and if people want to go and work in there, go on holiday and still work, what does that mean? Is that environment safe? Yeah, there's a lot of stuff we're going to have to continue to work through and manage. It doesn't just roll off the tongue and happen.
Ben, any final thoughts or a response to that?
Yeah, look, I think on average, we're going to see 2 to 3 days per week across organisations. I think what I would say sort of as the nuance around that is that it depends on the work that they do. So some people, if they can and want to work 5 days a week in the office or remotely, I think they should. I think that there are some organisations that are approaching it from the perspective of, I want to get my people back into the office because I've paid for a lease and I want value for money. But if you're not going to get the best out of your people, then that's the completely wrong angle to approach it from. And I think that at the end of the day, we really need to think about how people want to use the office, how they want to use their home environment, and design for intentionality around all of that. But I'm a very big advocate of it comes down to the team level. It's not what works for the organisation. I really don't think organisations should say across every single division, across every single branch, you need to be in the office 2 days a week. I think it needs to come down to what works for the team and empowering teams to design their work weeks and where they work.
Yeah, and I would completely echo that. I think they're great comments, Ben and Lex as well. I think the piece for me is it's not whether working from home is permanent. It's the way that we work has changed permanently. And I think that the design process that organizations have to be thoughtful of is how do they harness the best talents of their people? How do they get their people to be able to focus on their customers' problems, their partners' problems, and to create an environment that is conducive to doing that? And whether that is using technology in some cases to allow everyone's ideas and talent, irrespective of their location, to come to the fore, or whether it is the very, very real benefit that you get from collaborating with people in a physical space and really just generating ideas. I think that's the focus that leadership has to take. And that, I do believe, is a permanent shift.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed the discussion today, even though I was not planning to moderate and participate. Thank you, speakers, for being gracious, and thank you for making the time to CEDA's members. Alexis, Steve, and Ben really have appreciated your insights. Finally, I would like to thank the audience for joining us today and for taking your time to spend that with us and participating. Thank you for the very large amount of questions we received. Of course, we were never able to get through all of those. If you'd like to keep up to date on CEDA's forthcoming program of work, you can do so by visiting www.ceda.com.au. And up next for us on the 12th of March is Aged Care Royal Commission, The Way Forward with Senator the Honourable Richard Colby. Please do continue the conversation on Twitter by visiting CEDA there, or on LinkedIn and Instagram, YouTube or Facebook. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all very much.